Yorana Tato. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today and share some recent research, somewhat recent research that we've done over on Rapa Nui. Mark sends his regrets. He's actually on Rapa Nui right now, working with our colleague Brett Shepherdson and the Terivaka Archaeological Outreach Program. They're training the next generation of Rapa Nui archaeologists, working with about 20 high school students there. Many of you are familiar with the ahu and moai of Rapa Nui. This map shows the nearly 1,000 moai, or statues, that have been documented on the island of Rapa Nui. Many of them were placed atop ahu, or ceremonial platforms, which are mostly in coastal locations around the island. There are over 360, and some of them feature large statues or moai. As you can see, many of the moai are centralized at the quarry at Maunga Eo or Ranororaku, and we'll come back to that. So moai eyes are exceedingly rare in the archaeological record. Moai eyes were fashioned with coral or pumice for the sclera or the whites of the eyes, and filled with either obsidian or red scoria, also known as honey discs, which represent not only, of course, the pupils, but also the irises of the eyes. This is a diagram from Jose Miguel Ramirez. And as you can see, the moai eyes that we know from oral traditions, ethnographic accounts, and of course, archaeology, that the eye sockets of the statues were not carved until they were erected on the ahu and became aringa ora, or the living faces of the ancestors. Moai eyes are known from 3 archaeological contexts on the island. We have Anakena at the Ahu Naunau on the northern coast. We also have some examples from Ahu Tautira in Hangaroa, which is the main town of Rapa Nui on the western coast, and down on the south coast at Vinapu at Ahu Tahira. We also have some moai eyes that have been excavated. As you can see here, this is Ahu Naunau at Anakena, with some replica coral and scoria eyes that have been inlaid for an important ceremony recently. The original eye fragments are in the Rapa Nui Museum. You can see that pictured at the bottom. They were recovered from by Rapa Nui archaeologists Sergio Rapu and Sonia Hawa in 1978 when that ahu was restored. Obsidian moai eyes are not only found in megalithic statues or stone statues, but also in moai miro or wooden statues. And we can see many examples in museum collections around the world, including moai papa, female figures, as well as moai kawakawa. Now, as you can see in these 2 moai figures, the lobes of the ears were also carved, but to our knowledge, we don't have any obsidian inserts that were placed into those eyes in museum collections. And so that questions the interpretation on the image on the right here by Joanne Van Tilburg, where she posited that this disc may have been a moai eye or it may have been an ear insert. And that's actually one of the artifacts that we analyzed during the current study. Today, we're going to travel to the Museo Antropologico Padre Sebastian Englert, also known as MAPSE, or the Rapa Nui Museum. This is Rapa Nui's only museum. It was established in 1973, and it is currently part of the Chilean DBOM network of libraries, archives, and museums. It is the only repository for collections from archaeological projects on Rapa Nui. Here's a look behind the scenes at some of the tens of thousands of artifacts and samples that are curated at the Rapa Nui Museum. Many of them, of course, have been rehoused and cataloged. And so in 2016, when I traveled to the Rapa Nui Museum with this instrument, you all are familiar with this, is a Bruker PXRF tracer instrument to conduct some analysis. I was able to spend a lot of time with some of the collections. And as I started working with some collections that I had collected as part of my doctoral research, the museum staff there brought me many more to analyze with my magic gun, as everybody at the airport called it. So, of course, the great thing about portable X-ray fluorescence is that it's completely non-destructive. It's portable, so it's ideal for both collections-based and place-based field research. It has a fast processing time, so it's useful for meta-analyses or analyses of thousands of artifacts, and it can measure concentrations of 10 trace elements. Now on Rapa Nui, there are 4 geochemical sources of obsidian, 4 obsidian sources. They're all spatially clustered in the southwestern portion of the island, but they are distinctive geochemically, and so we can use PXRF to discriminate between these 4 sources, which are Orito Ronokau 1, also known as Te Manawai, Ronokau 2, and on the offshore islet of Motuiti. For the current analysis, we looked at a total of 20 artifacts, including 19 artifacts from Ahutatira on the western coast of the island, and 1 artifact that was surface collected at Hanganui, and that's in a private collection on the island of Mike Rapu. Ahutatira, located right in town at Hangaroa Otai, was excavated and restored by Andrea Sillenfreund, Sergio Rapu, and Charlie Love back in 1979 to 1980. They excavated 6 trenches that provided cross sections across the Ahu, showing the construction sequence. And as with other Ahu on the island, multiple phases of construction and, of course, enlarging of the Ahu through time. The assemblage of artifacts and samples is curated by the Rapa Nui Museum. It's a large assemblage, which includes lots of midden, of course, portable artifacts, as well as charcoal. And in 1998, some of the charcoal samples were analyzed and were submitted. And you can see some pretty broad date ranges there. So one sample from the crematorium dating all the way back to calibrated to 1240 to 1400. And then we have underneath the Ahu suggesting initial construction around 1400 to 1640, followed by a later building phase in the 17th to 19th century. Now, before I go off on a tangent on radiocarbon dating, because those of you who know me know I like to talk about radiocarbon dates and all of the problems with them. Those are no exception. They're from unidentified wood charcoal. But we're going to return to the legacy collections. So this is one of the boxes that the museum staff brought to my attention while I was there and placed in front of me and said, you have to analyze this. And so on the outside of the box, you can see lots of catalog numbers, of course, materials being bone, lithics, and coral, and some observations, one important one being ojos, or eyes. This is what it looks like when you open the box. A few artifacts from Ahutatira. So you can see a number of tanged obsidian implements known as mata, also some toki or adzes, and other artifacts. In the next tray, we see more toki, some chisels, as well as these round discs made of obsidian. You'll also notice that there's a basalt disc there. And finally, at the bottom, more chisels and more discs, including these very large ones with a large amount of cortex on the back side of these discs. When we turn them around, this is what they look like, really nice, flat bulbs of percussion. And you can see that there are 19 artifacts. And the reason that there's a question mark there is that when they initially analyzed these samples, Andrea only classified 9 of them as eyes. And when we went back and looked at them, we thought, these are possible eyes. Some of them are not perfectly round or oval, but we included them in the analysis, and we also ran the mata and other obsidian artifacts from Ahutatira. Now you can see they range in size from about 2 to 4 centimeters, so very small, to the largest, which is 14 centimeters in diameter. Here's the magic gun in action, the PXRF at the lab. And we were, of course, analyzing all of these there. Now, we also made a house call with the, quote, magic gun or the tracer PXRF to the home of Mike Rapu, who contains this beautiful artifact in his private collection. This is a very large piece of obsidian, worked obsidian, that's interpreted as a moai eye. It's about 25.8 centimeters, so very big, very dense, just gorgeous. And so we had the great privilege of joining Mike at his home to analyze this artifact as well. Now, this is not from an archaeological context. This was surface collected about a decade ago, and it was collected near the shoreline in Rapa Nui, very close to Ahu Tongariki, which is the largest ahu that has 15 statues or moai. We utilize support vector machines classification of raw material from 4 sources. So we know there are 4 obsidian sources. And what we notice in the support vector machines classification is in stage 1, we have some overlap, right? It's able to distinguish the Ranokau 2 and Motuiti sources, but we have a lot of overlap with Orito and Ranokau 1. So this is similar to the discriminant function analysis that was done by Stevenson and by our team in 2013 and 2014, respectively. For this analysis, we use support vector machines and stage 2, which enables us to differentiate between those 2 overlapping sources of Ranokau 1 and Orito. So these are the geochemical sources. These were provided by Chris Stevenson, and you can see that they cluster fairly nicely using that SVM classification. Now, if we look at the plot for the artifacts that were analyzed in this study, so this includes, again, not only the moai eyes, but some of the other obsidian artifacts from the excavations at Ahu Tautira, we can see that you have that all of the samples are clustering in stage 1 in the Orito or Ranokau 1 source. In stage 2, we're able to differentiate them all and assign all 20 artifacts to the Orito source. So our working title for this paper is All Eyes on Orito. Pretty fun. But the moai eye from Rapa Nui, as well as all 19 artifacts from Ahu Tautira, are sourced to that singular source of Orito. This is unsurprising, as Orito is the largest source. It also has very high quality material. The Motuiti source is also very high quality, but it's much smaller. Now, if we contextualize this with other recent obsidian sourcing studies on the island, we can see some similarities and some differences to previous studies. So if we look to Stevenson et al.'s 2013 analysis, where they analyzed samples from habitation context, those are shown by as blue squares on the map there. They have 205 samples, fairly even distribution between Ranokau 1 and the Orito source. And then they also analyzed samples that are shown by lilac triangles there at Ahu and Crematoria. And you see a different pattern emerging there with the Motuiti source making up almost about a fifth of the samples. And so that led them to propose that perhaps what we were seeing at those Ahu and Crematoria was the Motuiti source being used more widely, and that demonstrating elite control of that offshore resource. Now, more recently, we've done a number of analyses, including the Bishop Museum ethnology collections. These are not provenience. These were collected mostly during the early 20th century, so they have an island-wide sort of provenience. And the vast majority of those, as well as those from Hangaho'onu on the northern coast, over 1,700 flakes mostly, were analyzed, and then also 457 artifacts from the southwestern coast in the 1968 survey area. What we see in all 3 of these studies is an overwhelming preference for that high quality Orito obsidian. So of course, what does this mean, right? just as we have with the Maunga'eo or Ranororaku moai quarry, which is shown with a yellow triangle there, as well as the Punapau Pukau or top knot quarry. We have resources being extracted from various areas of the island and being utilized all over the island in an island-wide context. We also have major basalt quarries that have been identified in a number of locations on the island. And again, we see toki circulating throughout the island from those sources. Now, Lippo et al. Suggests that there were some localized spheres of interaction that were based on seriation of mata. And Morrison in 2012 conducted a settlement pattern analysis across a number of project areas. And from the very high redundancy of sort of clustered settlement patterns in various areas, he concluded that a picture is emerging of island socio-political organization focused on small-scale autonomous social groups rather than large-scale centralized organization. So sort of in opposition to what Stevenson et al. were proposing with the elite control of the Motiiti source. Now, when we sort of put it all together, resource procurement, what we're seeing is what we think is semi-autonomous groups, right, occupying discrete territories, but the movement of people, ideas, resources throughout the island across those territorial boundaries. So lots of opportunities for future research. And with that, I'll say maururu. Thank you so much to everybody who has facilitated access to collections, and thanks to all of you.